No one thought a single piece of paper could change everything, especially not him. Because at that moment, he wasn't rich, he wasn't powerful, and he definitely wasn't special. He was just another person, overwhelmed by numbers he didn't fully understand and obligations he didn't feel in control of. The document didn't look impressive. There was no gold seal, no dramatic headline, no language that screamed opportunity. In fact, it looked boring, technical, and easy to ignore, the kind of paper most people sign without reading carefully, trusting that nothing important could possibly be hidden inside something so ordinary. But what made this document different wasn't how it looked. It was what it forced him to confront. Because the moment he sat down and actually read it, slowly, line by line, something uncomfortable became impossible to escape. The realization that his financial life wasn't shaped by luck or circumstances, but by decisions he had made without fully understanding their long-term consequences. At first, he felt defensive, like most people do when reality challenges their self-image, telling himself that everyone else was doing the same thing, that this was just how the system worked, that no one really reads these documents anyway. But deep down, a quieter voice was asking a far more dangerous question. What if this paper wasn't the problem? What if it was simply exposing one? The document laid everything out in a way no motivational speech ever could. Timelines, penalties, obligations. Clauses that quietly transferred risk in one direction only, and for the first time, he saw how small decisions made years earlier had stacked on top of each other, creating a structure that limited his freedom without him ever noticing it happening. What unsettled him most wasn't the numbers, it was the asymmetry. How one side carried almost all the responsibility while the other retained flexibility, control, and options. And that imbalance forced him to confront something most people avoid their entire lives: the difference between owning an outcome and being trapped inside one. As he continued reading, a pattern emerged. Every clause protected someone, but not him. Every contingency assumed he would absorb the shock if things went wrong. And suddenly he understood why progress had always felt exhausting, why every step forward came with pressure, anxiety, and fear of making a single mistake. This wasn't just about money anymore, it was about exposure. About how vulnerable his life was to events outside his control and how little margin for error. He actually had a realization that hit harder than any loss ever could. He put the document down and stared at the table, realizing that nothing in his financial life had been designed intentionally. It had simply evolved through convenience, trust, and avoidance. And now those habits were visible in black and white. What made this moment different from all the others wasn't information. He had seen numbers before, contracts before, statements before. But this time, the document forced him to slow down, to see time not as days or months, but as obligations stretching forward, silently dictating his future. He began asking questions he had never asked before, questions that felt uncomfortable but necessary, like who benefits if nothing changes? Who absorbs the downside when things fail? And why the systems seem to work effortlessly for some people while constantly demanding sacrifice from others. The most disturbing realization came when he understood that this document wasn't unique. It wasn't a rare trap or an unlucky situation. It was standard, normal, accepted. And that meant millions of people were living inside similar structures without ever realizing it. That's when the shift happened. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, he felt clarity. Because once something is visible, it can be addressed, and once a system is understood, it can be redesigned. But only if someone is willing to stop pretending that ignorance is protection. He didn't rush to fix everything at once. He didn't panic or make dramatic moves. Instead, he started doing something deceptively simple. He began reading everything, not skimming, not trusting summaries, but actually understanding what he was agreeing to, what risks he was accepting, and what flexibility he was giving up. The document had done something no guru ever managed to do. It made the cost of convenience undeniable. Every signature now felt heavier, every agreement demanded evaluation, and slowly, His relationship with money began to change, not because he suddenly earned more, but because he stopped leaking control through decisions he didn't fully understand. He realized that wealth isn't just built by what you earn, but by what you protect. And that most people aren't poor because they lack opportunity, but because they unknowingly sign away leverage in exchange for short-term comfort. This single document didn't make him rich overnight, but it rewired how he thought about risk, responsibility, and ownership. And once that shift happens, going back becomes impossible, because you start seeing the invisible structures shaping everyone's financial life. And as he sat there, the paper still open in front of him, he understood something that would quietly guide every decision from that moment forward: that the most dangerous documents aren't the ones filled with threats, but the ones that look harmless enough to ignore. From that day forward, the way he interacted with money changed at a fundamental level, not because his income suddenly exploded, but because awareness replaced autopilot. And awareness has a way of exposing risks long before they turn into disasters. He started revisiting old agreements he had signed years earlier, documents he barely remembered. And with every page, the same pattern repeated itself: obligations locked in, flexibility removed. Responsibility shifted quietly onto his shoulders while control stayed elsewhere. And it became painfully clear that his financial stress wasn't the result of bad luck, but of accumulated exposure. Instead of feeling trapped, he felt oddly empowered, because once you understand the rules of a system, you can choose how to play it. And he began restructuring his life around a new principle: never accept an outcome where the downside is unlimited and the upside is capped. That single rule alone eliminated countless opportunities that once looked attractive, but would have left him fragile. And while others chased growth at any cost, he became selective, patient, and deliberate. He learned to negotiate not aggressively, but intelligently, asking questions. Most people avoid questions about exit options, contingencies, and what happens when plans don't work as expected. And to his surprise, many agreements improved instantly simply because someone finally challenged assumptions that everyone else accepted blindly. Over time, his financial life became quieter, not stagnant, but stable, predictable, and resilient. And that stability created something far more valuable than excitement. It created optionality. Opportunities began appearing not because he hunted them, but because he was no longer desperate, no longer cornered by obligations that forced quick decisions. And when something didn't align with his principles, he could walk away without fear. The document that once felt intimidating became a reference point, a reminder of how easily people surrender control without realizing it. And he often wondered how different his life might have been if someone had explained this earlier, before years of exposure piled up unnoticed. But then he realized something important: most people wouldn't have listened. Because the lesson isn't dramatic, it doesn't promise instant wealth, and it doesn't flatter the ego. Instead, it asks for responsibility, patience, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. True financial freedom, he discovered, isn't about maximizing income. It's about minimizing fragility, about designing a life where mistakes don't destroy you and uncertainty doesn't paralyze you. Years later, when others asked him what changed everything, they expected a dramatic story, a lucky break, a secret investment. But the truth always surprised them, because it wasn't an opportunity that transformed his life. It was a realization triggered by a document most people would have ignored. He understood now that every financial decision is a trade, not just of money, but of control, time, and peace of mind, and that the most dangerous cost is the one you don't see until it is too late. The paper itself was never special. It was the awareness it forced that mattered. And once that awareness exists, it reshapes how you move through the world, making you calmer, more deliberate, and far less vulnerable to pressure. As he looked back, he didn't regret the years before the document, because without them, the lesson wouldn't have landed, and without that moment of clarity, he might still be chasing progress while unknowingly building a fragile life. Now, every time he signs something, no matter how small, he pauses, reads, and asks himself one question: who carries the risk if this fails? And if the answer isn't clear, he doesn't proceed. That single habit, born from one ordinary-looking document, quietly protected him from countless mistakes, allowing his financial life to grow not through speed, but through durability. And while most people will continue scrolling past fine print and trusting that everything will work out, he knows better, because he learned the hard way that the future is often decided not by bold moves, but by the documents we choose to take seriously when no one else does.